The badge tore away from Emma Johnson's uniform with a sound like ripping fabric, except it was metal screaming against Kevlar. She didn't move. That was the first impossible thing. Kael'thas's security detail, 3 of them, all neural cluster exposed and bristling with that particular kind of righteous diplomatic fury, held the silver insignia between them like it was a live grenade. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The station security chief's badge. The one that meant something on Meridian Station. The one that, according to every regulation in the Vexthul Diplomatic Handbook, had just been desecrated. "You do not override the envoy," Kael'thas said, his vocal harmonics vibrating through the detention block's reinforced walls. Behind him, his entourage shifted. Protocol violation. They could feel it. Emma's hand was still raised, mid-gesture, where she'd been explaining, again, why the weapons shipment couldn't proceed. The one Kael'thas kept insisting was just diplomatic immunity materiel. The one that was, in fact, enough ordnance to level 3 city blocks. The one that, according to her authority under Station Regulation 7-19, had to be classified, inspected, and approved before anything left the docking bay. She looked at her wrist where the badge used to be. Then she looked at Kael'thas. "Oh, sure," Emma said, her voice conversational in that way that made junior officers nervous. Because that always works out well. The Vexthul envoy's neural cluster pulsed. Confusion, rage, the simultaneous sensation of someone following protocol perfectly and having it shattered anyway. "Your authority is revoked," Kael'thas announced, which wasn't actually how any of this worked. Which was probably why the emergency lights in Sinara's office started flashing approximately 0.3 seconds later. Commander Sinara stood from her desk, reading the alert that had just thrown itself across her screen in screaming red capitals. Physical altercation. Detention block. Security chief involved. She was moving before the second alert dropped. Badge removal. Vexthul envoy. Diplomatic immunity. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no, no." Her deputy was already on comms. "We have officers responding, Commander. ETA 12 seconds. 12 seconds. Sinara was already calculating. The Vexthul had been looking for an incident since they arrived. Something that proved humans couldn't be trusted with authority. Something that showed their primitive emotional systems made them unsuitable for higher-level decision-making on a multi-species station. A badge removal wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of dominance. A statement that human authority was conditional, revocable, subordinate. And if Kael'thas got away with it, then every species with diplomatic immunity would try the same thing. The whole power structure would collapse like a house of cards built by someone who didn't understand cards. She was already heading to the turbo lift. Down in the detention block, something else impossible was happening. Zara, the Vexthul cub, only 93 cycles old, barely adolescent by their standards, was watching Emma's face. The young alien had accompanied the delegation as a cultural observer, which in practice meant shadowing the envoy and learning how Vexthul diplomacy worked. Except Zara was actually watching, which was the problem. The human security chief looked at her torn uniform, at the badge being held like a trophy by Kael'thas's detail, at the envoy's posture, which screamed victory according to every protocol in the Vexthul cultural matrix. Then Emma smiled, not a smile that meant anything good. "Wow," Emma said to no one in particular. "Finally, I've been trying to get a promotion for 3 years. Turns out all I had to do was refuse to let war criminals onto my station. Who knew? She was joking. She was actually joking about losing her authority. Kyle Thas's cluster pulsed again. Confusion was now tangled with something that might have been alarm. This wasn't the response. The protocol was clear. Human removed from authority, human defers or resists. Situation escalates or resolves based on social dominance hierarchy. The human was supposed to either become submissive or aggressive. She was being dismissive. Your station? Kyle Thas's harmonics were sharp now, cutting. You have no authority here. Then I guess we're both doing our jobs badly, Emma said, glancing at the badge. Except I'm pretty sure my job description doesn't include letting you decide what constitutes a weapons shipment. Funny how that works. Zara moved. The young Vex Thule stepped forward and reached up to where the security detail was holding the badge. The gesture was careful, reverent almost. The detail didn't stop her. Protocol hadn't covered the situation. Why would a cub want the desecrated symbol? Zara held the badge in her smaller hands. We'll stitch it into their skin, she said, her young voice serious, confused, like she was explaining something obvious. To show what we've done, to make them remember. The detention block went very, very quiet. Emma, who had seen a lot in her 14 years as a security officer, who had negotiated with 3 different insectile species and 1 form of collective consciousness, looked at the young Vex Thule cub holding her badge and talking about stitching authority into flesh. Okay, Emma said slowly. That's new. And in her office, Sinara heard the situation report and stopped moving. Badge removal, threat of physical desecration, young alien involved. This wasn't a diplomatic incident anymore. This was a cascade event. Zara's hands trembled as she held the badge, and Emma realized with absolute certainty that the young Vex Thule wasn't making a threat. She was making an offer. The stitching will honor you, Zara continued, her vocal harmonics uncertain but genuine. My people did this for the Valorian champion after the 3rd conflict. We wove his insignia into his dermis. Everyone could see what he had survived, what he had overcome. The detention block's temperatures seemed to drop 10 degrees. Emma kept her expression neutral while her brain performed emergency calculations. Zara was maybe 1/3 Emma's age in human years, but thought in terms of literal physical integration of authority symbols. This wasn't a threat. This was a cub genuinely trying to solve a problem according to cultural frameworks that made perfect sense inside Vex Thule society, and absolutely no sense anywhere else in the known galaxy. Right, Emma said carefully. So, when you say stitching, into the dermis, Zara confirmed. Already moving closer, already examining Emma's arm like she was planning logistics. It would take several hours. The dyes would need to be recalibrated for human skin pigmentation. But it would be permanent. Everyone would know. Kyle Thas made no move to stop her. That was the real problem. The envoy stood silent, watching this unfold, and Emma understood immediately what was happening. Kyle Thas wasn't correcting Zara because this served his purposes perfectly. A human security chief permanently marked by Vex Thule insignia? That wasn't desecration anymore. That was ownership. Zara, Emma said, keeping her voice level. I appreciate the offer, genuinely. But I need you to understand something about human culture. She understands nothing, Kyle Thas interjected, his harmonics sharp with contempt. Your species lacks the neural complexity for true cultural integration. This is why you require supervision. In her office, Sinara was already 3 steps into a communications disaster. Her deputy had initiated standard diplomatic protocols. Kael'thas's senior attaché was demanding the detention block be cleared. Human security was requesting authorization to move in. Vex'Thul diplomatic immunity was being cited 7 different ways, each one technically correct, each one completely useless. "Get me the cultural liaison," Sinara ordered, pulling up the station's regulatory framework. "And someone from xenopsychology." "Both are responding, Commander. But..." Her deputy's voice carried that particular tone of someone about to deliver bad news. The Vex'Thul cultural liaison just invoked hierarchical precedent. They're claiming that since their envoy holds superior rank within the diplomatic corps, human security protocols are subordinate to Vex'Thul authority during this dispute. Sinara stopped moving. That wasn't in any regulation she'd ever seen, which meant it was probably in their regulations, and they were just now deciding to use it. How is that possible? According to their filing, sent 5 minutes ago, because the badge removal occurred during a dispute over materiel classification, and materiel classification falls under trade authority, and trade authority is negotiated at the diplomatic corps level. Her deputy trailed off. They technically have a point. It's a terrible point. It's going to destroy the entire framework of this station. But technically, they have a point, Sinara finished. "Send it to legal. I'm heading down there." She was moving before the lift doors opened. "Humans don't integrate our authority symbols into our bodies," Emma was explaining to Zara. And she was very carefully not looking at Kael'thas, because if she made eye contact right now, someone was going to get thrown out an airlock, and the paperwork for that would be catastrophic. "Why not?" Zara asked, genuinely confused. "How does anyone know your authority is real?" "We have badges," Emma said. "And we can take them off. That's the important part. We can take them off. It means the authority isn't part of us. It's something we earn and something we can lose. It's a responsibility we choose." Zara's cluster pulsed. The young Vex'Thul was actually processing this. "So, if you remove the badge, you've removed the responsibility?" "No," Emma said. "That's the thing. Removing a badge doesn't change what you're responsible for. It just means someone else thinks you can't handle it anymore. But they're making a choice, and that choice means something." Kael'thas was still silent, watching. Emma finally met his eyes. "And right now," Emma continued, still speaking to Zara, but letting every word hit the envoy, "your boss is making a choice about what kind of person he is. He's choosing to use a young alien's cultural traditions as a weapon. That's not protocol. That's not diplomacy. That's just cruelty with authorization attached." The detention block doors hissed open. Sinara stepped through, took one look at the scene, young alien with badge in hand, senior security chief standing ground, envoy radiating calculated malice, and made her own impossible decision. She stood next to Emma. "The badge goes back," Sinara said to Kael'thas, her voice perfectly level. "Right now, or we're filing a formal complaint with the diplomatic corps about culture exploitation and threatening a minor. You choose which precedent you want to set." The envoy's neural cluster pulsed once. Then he gestured to his detail. The badge wasn't returned. It was thrown. The badge skidded across the detention block floor with a sound like a scream. Zara caught it without thinking, her reflexes faster than protocol, faster than thought. She held it again, confused, because Kael'thas had just thrown it instead of returning it, which violated literally everything about proper diplomatic gesture resolution. Sinara opened her mouth to invoke containment procedures, and Kael'thas spoke first. "Your station has no authority over Vex'Thul diplomatic materials. he said, each word precisely calibrated according to Vexthul communication hierarchy. The shipment proceeds under classification seal. This is not negotiable. Actually, Sinara began, already pulling up the protocols. Station security has explicit authority over all materials entering. Not over diplomatic shipments, Kael'thas interrupted. Not when the diplomatic corps has declared them classified. Your station's authority is subordinate. This is established framework. He wasn't wrong. It was established framework. It was also a framework that had worked fine when everyone assumed good faith, when nobody was actively trying to use it as a weapon, when the diplomatic corps was actually interested in preventing wars instead of facilitating them. Emma watched Sinara's face as she realized the structure they'd all been relying on didn't actually prevent anything. It just formalized the collapse. I'm invoking Regulation 19C, Sinara said, her voice tight, which requires materials classification review by neutral parties before. Regulation 19C was superseded by Diplomatic Protocol Addendum 7, Kael'thas said, filed 3 hours ago, before the incident. He was lying. Probably. Emma watched Sinara's face confirm that he wasn't. The addendum had been filed. It was legal. It was also clearly the backup plan. If Emma wouldn't be intimidated into compliance, they'd just change the rules. That addendum hasn't been ratified by Station Command. Sinara tried. It doesn't require ratification, Kael'thas said. It requires notification, which we just provided. The detention block had become very quiet. Emma could hear the distant hum of the station's life support systems, the constant background sound of Meridian Station keeping everyone alive, the station she was supposed to protect, the station that was, right now, being systematically locked out of its own security decisions through the precise application of regulations that had seemed helpful last week. Zara was still holding the badge. Envoy Kael'thas, Emma said quietly. Let me ask you something. Kael'thas's cluster pulsed. Annoyance. But he gestured for her to continue. Protocol demanded at least that much. If you wanted me gone, Emma continued, speaking slowly, carefully, you had options. You could have requested my removal through proper channels. You could have filed a complaint about my competence with the station board. You could have used a dozen different regulations to make that happen. All of them legal. All of them clean. She let that sit for a moment. But you didn't do any of that. Instead, you physically tore the badge off my uniform. You did it in front of witnesses. You did it publicly, which means you made a choice to violate protocol. You chose to do something that wasn't just about removing me from authority. It was about proving you could remove anyone you wanted, any way you wanted, and nobody would stop you because you have immunity. Kael'thas's neural cluster pulsed faster. Warning signals. The combination of anger and something that might have been alarm. You made a choice, Emma repeated. That's the important part. You could have done this quietly and cleanly and within the system. But you didn't. You chose humiliation instead of procedure, which means you're not following protocol. You're following intention. Zara made a sound, something between a vocalization and a hum that Emma's translation implants converted to something like realization. She's right, the young Vexthul said, her voice small but certain. In our culture, if you choose a method, you're responsible for what it means. If you choose physical desecration, you're choosing to declare dominance. If you choose quiet procedure, you're choosing to acknowledge authority. Envoy Kael'thas chose his method. Kael'thas turned toward Zara with the kind of look that suggested he was reconsidering her value as a cultural observer. "The cub understands nothing," he said. But his harmonics were different now. Sharper, defensive. "The cub understands exactly," Zara said. And Emma realized with some amazement that the young alien was standing straighter now. Was meeting Kael'thas's gaze with something that looked very much like challenge. "Envoy, you made your choice visible. Now everyone knows what it was." Behind them, Emma's security team had stopped moving. Sinara had stopped trying to invoke regulations. The detention block had become a space where a fundamental principle was being tested. Whether the systems that held multi-species civilization together actually worked, or whether they were just polite fictions waiting for someone ruthless enough to expose them. An alert chimed on Sinara's wrist. Her face went very pale. "The weapons shipment," she said quietly. "Its classification just triggered automated transmission protocols. It's being sent to Docking Bay 7 for immediate departure. 40 minutes until launch. 40 minutes to stop a war." Emma smiled. Not the smile from before. Not the one born from dark humor and desperate situations. This was the smile of someone who had been waiting for a specific moment to arrive, and it had just landed exactly on time. "Actually," Emma said, her voice conversational in that way that made Kael'thas's cluster pulse with fresh alarm, "everything you just did has been recorded." She gestured to the detention block's security cameras. "Station Regulation 4A. All diplomatic incidents are recorded for future reference. And before you invoke immunity again, immunity covers diplomatic decisions, not criminal intent. There's a difference." Sinara's expression shifted from despair to something that looked very much like hope. "The weapons shipment classification," Emma continued, "was initiated under false pretenses. We have 17 records of you explicitly stating it was military ordnance. Then you switched classifications when challenged. That's documented. The physical assault on station security personnel, documented. The attempted intimidation of a minor, documented. The invocation of regulations specifically filed to circumvent security review, documented." Kael'thas's entire posture had changed. His neural cluster was pulsing in rapid, chaotic patterns that Emma's implants translated as something between anger and calculation. "You have no standing to make accusations," he said. But there was something hollow in it now. He was running through protocols, searching for the escape hatch, and finding nothing but his own deliberately chosen actions staring back at him. "I'm not making accusations," Emma said. "I'm describing what everyone just witnessed. And here's the thing about that. In your culture, witness testimony from someone unburdened by political motivation is binding. That's your own law. Zara is a cultural observer, not a diplomat. She has no political standing in this dispute." Emma turned to the young Vex Thule. "Zara, I need you to do something for me. I need you to deliver the badge back to me. Not as an apology from the envoy. He didn't authorize this. Not as a gift or a threat or anything ceremonial. I need you to deliver it as a witness statement. As a young person who saw what happened and is testifying to the truth of it. In Vex Thule culture, that testimony is binding, correct?" Zara's cluster pulsed with understanding. "Yes," she said quietly. "Youth testimony cannot be disputed in formal settings. It's considered uncorrupted by political motive." "Then deliver the badge as your testimony," Emma said. "Tell the record what you saw, what Envoy Kael'thas did, what it meant." Zara walked forward, her movements careful and deliberate. She held out the badge to Emma, and when the security chief took it, the young Vex Thule spoke directly to the recording system. "I am Zara, cultural observer, 93 cycles, unburdened by diplomatic authority, she said, her vocal harmonics formal in a way they hadn't been before. I witnessed Envoy Kael'thas deliberately remove the authority symbol from Chief Security Officer Emma Johnson. He did this knowing it was a violation of protocol. He did this because she refused to grant him override authority over weapons classification. This is my testimony. This is what I saw. Kael'thas made a sound that might have been a growl. You understand what you've done, he said to Zara. I understand I've told the truth, Zara replied. And there was something in her voice that reminded Emma why young aliens were valuable. They hadn't yet learned all the ways to lie. Sinara was already moving, already pulling up communications channels, already invoking station authority to lock down the weapons shipment. Security team, detain the classified materials. Nobody moves anything without explicit clearance from this office. You cannot, Kael'thas began. Your immunity covers diplomatic decisions, Emma interrupted, not crimes of intent. And you just admitted, on record, through your attempts to deny Zara's testimony, that you made a deliberate choice to violate protocol. Which means this isn't a diplomatic incident anymore. It's a security incident. Which means it falls under station authority. Which means I'm back to having full authority over weapons classification. She pinned the badge back on her uniform. The metal felt heavier than it had before. Or maybe that was just the weight of having forced someone to reveal themselves so completely that they had nowhere left to hide. The shipment is classified as contraband, Emma said, her voice calm and professional now. Under Station Regulation 719, all contraband is seized, catalogued, and destroyed, pending formal review. Which means your weapons aren't leaving. Which means whatever conflict you were trying to start doesn't happen. Which means you failed. Kael'thas's neural cluster had gone almost entirely still. This will not be forgotten, he said quietly. No, Emma agreed. It won't be. But that's the point, isn't it? You made a choice to be visible about it. You wanted everyone to see what you were doing. Well, they saw it. And now they know exactly what you are. She turned to Sinara. Get legal involved. Get the diplomatic corps involved. Get everyone involved. I want this documented so thoroughly that every species in this sector understands what happened here. Because if they don't, if they think Kael'thas got away with it, they're all going to try the same thing. Sinara nodded, already making calls. And Emma looked at Zara, still standing there, still holding herself like someone who had just learned that telling the truth could be the most powerful weapon in any negotiation. Thank you, Emma said simply. Zara's cluster pulsed with something that might have been pride. 3 weeks later, Meridian Station's administrative protocols looked like someone had decided to completely rebuild them from scratch. Which was accurate. Sinara sat in the station's central council chamber, watching the representatives from 47 different species review the documentation. The badge incident, they were calling it now. Not dismissively, with a kind of odd gravity usually reserved for historical pivots, because that's what it was turning out to be. The human security chief identified the logical trap. A Kalrathi representative was saying, their translation implants rendering the clicks and whistles into smooth, academic language. A system so internally consistent that it could be weaponized by anyone ruthless enough to understand it. The Vexthul envoy used protocol itself as a weapon. The human responded by turning the protocol's own rules against the abuse. Not just turning them, a Yaniri delegate added, using them to expose the violator. The human didn't fight the system. She revealed it. Sinara had already received 17 requests. 17 different species wanted human security specialists on their stations. Not because humans were stronger or smarter. Most species had individuals superior to humans in both categories. They wanted humans because Emma had done something that none of the traditional logical frameworks had considered. She'd simplified the problem down to its core component and asked, "What choice did you actually make?" And that simple question had revealed everything. The Vexthul cultural experts were still in heated debate about what had gone wrong. Their analysis kept circling back to the same conclusion. They'd optimized their entire system for logical consistency, but hadn't accounted for the possibility that someone would use that consistency as a weapon. They'd built a perfect structure and forgotten to include an exit clause for perfect abuse. Humans, apparently, never forgot that exit clause. Emma's office was significantly messier than it had been before the incident. This was primarily because Zara had taken up residence in the corner, asking approximately 400 questions per hour about human decision-making processes. But why would you intentionally choose to act based on emotion when logic provides a clearer answer? Zara was asking, watching Emma fill out incident reports. Because logic assumes everyone's playing by the same rules, Emma said, not looking up from her paperwork. When someone breaks the rules deliberately, pure logic just gets you trapped in their broken system. You have to step outside and ask what they're actually doing, instead of what they said they're doing. That seems inefficient. It is, Emma agreed, which is why most species don't do it. But humans have had approximately 10,000 years of experience with people lying, so we got good at noticing the gaps between what people say and what they actually want. Zara's cluster pulsed thoughtfully. I requested transfer to Cultural Studies program, the young Vexthul said. Focusing on human philosophy, Sinara approved it. I'm going to study how your species developed this gap recognition. Emma finally looked up from her reports and smiled. That's good. You're going to be valuable, Zara. You just saw your whole culture's framework get exposed as incomplete, and instead of defending it, you decided to learn why it failed. That's rare. I learned from observation, Zara said. You didn't defend your system when it failed either. You fixed it. I had help, Emma said, gesturing to the stack of commendations that had arrived from species leadership across the sector. And a lot of very motivated people who realized we were all standing in a building with bad plumbing. Her badge caught the light as she reached for her coffee, the new clasp holding perfectly. Someone from materials engineering had reinforced it specifically, with a joke about keeping it attached to people who actually value authority. Can I observe your coffee-making process? Zara asked. I don't understand the ritual significance. Emma laughed and gestured toward the break room. Come on, I'll show you. Fair warning, though. Human coffee-making is basically just controlled chaos held together by caffeine addiction and stubbornness. I'm beginning to understand why your species is valued, Zara said, following. In the central command hub, Sinara watched the incident report cycle through final approval. The weapons shipment was destroyed. Kael'thas was being recalled to Vexthul's space for investigation. The station's authority structure had been reinforced with explicit human oversight protocols. Multiple species had begun requesting human security consultants. Everything had changed because one human security chief had simply looked at someone who'd broken the rules and asked them to admit what they'd actually done. She pulled up the recorded testimony. Watching Zara's formal declaration of truth, watching Emma walk step by step through the logical trap Kael'thas had constructed, watching the moment when a young alien and an exhausted human had somehow held the entire weight of a failing diplomatic system together. Then she sent a message to Anthropic Affairs, requesting that Meridian Station be designated as a human cultural exchange hub. Everything was about to change again. But for now, in a small office on a multi-species station, Emma was teaching a curious young Vexithul about the precise ratio of water to coffee grounds that made humans functional. And somehow that ordinary moment was the most revolutionary thing that had happened all year.